Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Psyched. I am Dr. T, the founder of Vision to Venture. I don't just talk about mental health in theory, I talk about it through lived experience. And I'm also a United States Marine Corps veteran where mental resilience wasn't optional. And this is the host, Dr. Liz.
Hi, I'm Dr. Liz. I am a co-host. I'm Dr. Liz DuBois Erskine. I am the No Apologies Executive Coach. I work especially with women on leadership, confidence, overcoming trauma, and all sorts of good stuff that we'll get into a little bit here today. Before we do that, Dr. T, can you give us a disclaimer, please?
Yes, of course. So I do want to disclaim to everyone we are not medical doctors. I don't want anything in this podcast to get misconstrued with medical advice. We are not advising you to get on or off medication. We are not telling you what to do and how to handle your medical conditions. We're just here talking about our lived experiences in hopes to kind of bring awareness to certain experiences. Did I miss
Thank you.
anything?
Love it. Okay, so today we are joined by Jay Watson, my neighbor here on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Jay's a co-host of the Eastern Shore Talk podcast, where I've gotten to be a guest before. He's got a background of overcoming trauma from his own past that he has used to help other people find tools for healing, for their own personal growth. He's done a tremendous amount of courageous work on his own mental health, getting to a good place. And has become a huge advocate for self-care, as well as helping create tools for other people who are navigating mental health challenges. So with all of that said, we're grateful to have you, Jay. Welcome.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate you having me on. This is only my second time ever as a guest, so it's kind of role reversal for me, but I'm glad to be here.
Good. Well, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us your story.
So, like Dr. Liz said, born and raised here on Eastern Shore, Maryland. I come from a background of childhood sexual abuse. I was sexually abused by extended family members at around the age of 6. I want to make sure it's clear to everyone that it was not my parents who abused me. It was extended family members, two separate members, two separate incidents. And I tried to report this to my mother. My mother was an addict, so she was neither willing or able to be a foundation of support for me in what I was going through. So I was kind of left to my own devices from the age of 6 or 7, and struggled with finding my way. Anxiety, depression, and PTSD have all been a part of my journey. I did not start to begin to kind of come out of my fog until I was about 40 years old, when I can look back now and realize that God's grace led me to do some self-examination and ask myself an important question: what's my own role in my own unhappiness? This was after a long line of failed relationships, and I was just kind of the point in a relationship standpoint where I was asking myself, is this the way I want my life to be? I know it's not. I'm not happy. What's going on here? So then I had to ask myself, what's my role in all that? The other, whether those people were or were not the right choices for me, I was making those choices, and I had to make the choice to try to find my way into a better direction. It wasn't until I was about 45 that I said the words out loud to someone else that I'd been sexually abused as a child.
Wow.
And I can look back now and see that that was the moment my healing journey began, saying the words out loud and confiding in someone in a very unexpected way. It just kind of, it wasn't planned. It just kind of fell out of my mouth. And lots of self-reflection, finding my relationship with God, tons and tons of self-care has kind of gotten me here in the last 5 or 6 years, where I've come to fortunately, and by the grace of God and a lot of work, found myself in the most peaceful and fulfilled place I've ever been in my life. So thus the transition into the Eastern Shore Talk podcast, where I try to use my story and help others to find the importance of self-care and finding health and peace for themselves.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I've never disclosed childhood sexual trauma, but I've come out twice about different experiences around sexual trauma, and it never gets easier, at least for me. And so I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of courage and so much power in simply speaking it aloud, because I think shame is baked into that type of violence where you become very silent and very small. Your will is being subjugated by someone else saying, this is what we're going to do. I get to choose what happens to you next. And you speaking up and saying, this is what happened to me, determines you taking that back. And I think there's so much courage in that. Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you, Dr. Liz, again, it took me till I was 45 to kind of, start to heal. And for 45 years, I identified as my circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought, this is as good as it gets for me. There's nothing better. I'm kind of doomed to this fate of this is the life that was given to me. The first time I said the words, it was absolutely terrifying. Each progressive time got a little bit easier. And I just finally got to a point where it was no longer about the circumstances. It was about where I am now and how I got from A to Z. So I don't fear ridicule or being stigmatized. I do feel a strange sense of responsibility being a male. The males tend to express less that they've been abused in any way, shape, or form. So there's that. But my only fear is that I don't want people to identify me as my circumstances, because I no longer do that. So my fear is not of shame. My fear is, okay, I'm not that. It's created me. I am who I am because of my circumstances, not in spite of my circumstances. So it takes a long time to get to that point. I started the journey at 45. I'm now 58. So you can imagine 13 years of progress and talking about it. It's not pleasant. I'd rather talk about the weather or sports or, anything that most folks talk about, but it's my tool. It's how God has chosen to use me as a messenger. So it's my tool. It's how I connect. So I try to help in whatever way I can in as far as using it that way.
Absolutely. You want to chime in, Dr. T?
Yes. So, well, first, I do want to thank you for, your bravery with it. I know that it's taken a while. And so for you, it's probably just like, another day in the neighborhood. But I know that is a heavy load, and that's a load that a lot of people carry. A lot of people still carry, and they haven't come to terms with that. And so there's one thing that you said that I kind of want to get a little bit more information about.
Yep.
You started at 45. And so I guess for 45 years, you've been dealing with that trauma and the effects of it. And I kind of want to know, how was that affecting you? And how did you get to the point at 45 to be like, okay, to have the self, awareness and the introspection to be like, okay, I'm ready to say this out loud. Like, what was that turning point like? And then what was it like for 45 years dealing with that? How did it affect you?
Right. Well, as you can imagine, like I said, my events started at 6 years old.
Yeah.
And, our brains, they call them formative years for a reason. We're not, our brains, our experiences is very limited. But I could tell, particularly with romantic relationships, that's kind of, again, that's the long line of favorite relationships was kind of the evidence for me that, although I didn't know it at the time, something was not right. And I had kind of pushed my trauma under the rug, like a lot of people do. And I kind of, you hear people use the metaphor of going through life and having an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, and they're battling each other with making certain decisions in life. Well, I had two negative folks on my shoulders. I had the one that was, okay, I came from a broken family, both parents addicts. So in order for me to create a happy family, I've got to do it myself. So I was getting into these relationships for unhealthy reasons in that way. The other one was all my friends and family and social circle, they're all married off and are having kids. I felt that pressure. So I was pushed into unhealthy ways to try to fill a round hole with a square peg. I was gonna fill my trauma with my own relationship and fix it that way, at least in my own, misunderstanding. We so often don't know what we don't know. And like I said, it was the failed relationships that were the motivator. And what made me say it out loud for the first time was just, again, one of my epiphanies. Looking back, I can think that I met someone that I was in the process of getting to know potentially romantically, and we were exchanging information about each other, and she said the words to me that she had been abused, and I'd never heard anybody tell me that ever. And something about her expressing those experiences to me felt safe in that very moment. I didn't plan it. I didn't know that was going to be a topic of conversation. It literally just, it came into me from her, and I reciprocated in that moment, knowing that if she is saying it to me, this is someone that I can trust right now. Tomorrow or a week from now, who knows? But in this moment, it just felt safe. You never know when those circumstances arise. And it wasn't like I knew I had this stuff and I had to talk to a therapist. That moment was just luck, blind circumstance. And probably, knowing me and how anxious and caught up in anxiety I am with anticipating talking to someone about something, it was probably the best way for me to express for the first time. Now, I would go on later to tell therapists and other folks that I trusted and kind of navigate from there. But I was very fortunate and lucky that a circumstance kind of came to me where I was able to express for the first time.
That's so powerful. Yeah. That's so powerful. Yeah, all three of us, it sounds like, have kind of a orientation around faith and a relationship. Both of you have said God. I kind of bracket in higher power. That feels safer to me from just past experiences growing up in different ways. But none of that strikes me as a coincidence, right? It's just like when the opportunity arises and we're ready, it's just so, it's like you can't not, right? There's that kind of moment if you're feeling sick where you're just like, no, I'm going to throw up no matter what. It's happening. And that sense of relief that followed, at least for me, was so like, oh man, like it was a dam breaking to be able to just have
it's immediate. Yeah. I could literally, as I had said the sentence, like it was this big exhale. And it took me a really long time to kind of sit with the impact of having said it for the first time. It was on my, and both good and bad. I was happy that I had done it. I was happy that it occurred the way it came about, but I was also like, okay, now what? The words are out there, and I trusted this person, and she's always kept my at the time, my secret. It's obviously no longer a secret, but there was always like, okay, now what? And that was the next thing. Okay, now that I've started, what's the next step? And I kind of really had to unravel that. And that was, and funny thing, it was never, kind of going back a little bit, it was never actually the circumstances of the actual events of being abused that I had the hardest time with. It was not having had a foundation of support from my family to help me through it. It was the alone feeling from that point on, more so than the physically having been traumatized. Although that was bad enough, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But that was harder for me. And like I carried a lot of internal anger for a very long time, and that was a whole kind of sidecar of trauma that went along with the events themselves. That the anger part was harder to unravel than the abuse part, as strange as that sounds. But yeah.
Go ahead, T.
Oh, sorry. I had a similar situation when I came out to talk about it for the first time, and it was kind of a moment like how you described. They were asking me a random set of questions, and one of them was like, have you ever been sexually abused? And that was the first time I'd ever been asked that, ever. And I sat and I thought about it, and that was the first time I sat and I was like, wow, does this count? Is maybe because you bury it, you don't want to think about it, you do a lot of things to just forget about it. And so that was the first time I had that kind of introspection moment, and I couldn't stop thinking about it after. I was like, okay, now what? Because now that I'm recognizing, could this have been affecting me? Could this have been, is this the reason that I've been acting like
Mhm.
this? It has my perspective been skewed because of this? Like I started to, and I wanted to talk about it more and more. And a lot like you, it wasn't, I wasn't necessarily having a hard time with my family in this circumstance. It was more so my command at the time because they weren't aware of what was going on, and a lot of it, you know, HIPAA, they can't release certain information, so they
Yeah.
just were like, are you malingering? You just don't want to, you don't want to come to work today, like what's going on? And that was really just the first time I was kind of having like a little bit of a mental breakdown because of it.
Mhm.
Just like, this is the first time in my life I'm thinking about it. Has this been affecting me? And so I definitely could relate to that, and I understand that circumstance a lot.
Yeah, I was also extremely self-isolating, antisocial. That was a very immediate and direct, early on, especially kind of from my trauma. When you can't trust the folks you're supposed to automatically trust, you can't, how are you going to trust whoever else comes into your life, whether it's at work or just friendships? Or I was very distant. Still to this day,
Mhm.
somewhat in that way, although it's, night and day in a lot of ways. I mean, I make a point to talk to people every Tuesday on the podcast about whatever. So there's that. But, I was just extremely antisocial. I was about as low on the people person scale as you could, possibly imagine. Um, and that took a lot of, unraveling as well. I'm never going to be a social butterfly now, but it's when you're no longer stuck in the fog of being of identifying yourself as your circumstances. You don't you trust in yourself, regardless of anybody else. The trust in yourself, you know the self confidence enough to be like, these folks are going to accept me or not, and you just kind of put yourself out there. Even in my case, limited social circumstances is kind of that was kind of a light bulb for me. It's funny. I remember my coach, Kathy Castle. I go to the beach every summer for vacation. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was in the elevator in the hotel, and I find myself striking up conversations with strangers just out of the blue. And I didn't plan it. I didn't say, "Hey, I want to try this practice of doing this." It just kind of happened. And I remember walking out of the elevator, and I thought, 5 years ago, I would have never done that. And it was a 2 minute conversation. It wasn't anything grand or deep or anything. It was just with strangers in an elevator. But and that was kind of one of those things where I'm like, yeah, I'm further along than I was before. So there's little things that you kind of, if you're self reflecting, you're like, okay, I was not able to do X, Y, and Z 5 years ago,
Mhm.
whatever, and now it just is. Um,
I want to talk about that or inquire about that a little bit more.
yep.
Trust, because I think trust is a big factor for so much. Because I'm wondering, is that trust or lack thereof, is that related and stemming from like the trauma and everything like that? Because I can relate to that non-trusting factor, but I have to be very aware of that in me, and I have to consciously, still maintain like a certain barrier of trust aside from what my natural default is, because if I stay in that like untrusting mentality, it can take me to a really extremely dark space. So I
Mhm.
try not to I don't know if you guys have had that occurrence or.
Well, for me, it was kind of two aspects to the lack of trust for me. There was my foundation didn't exist. So, like, in a very real logistical way, I could not trust. But there was
Mhm.
also the fact of I was I was treated as lesser by my abusers. So I'm not worthy of someone thinking highly enough of me. I can't trust that they're going to think highly of me because of my less
Yeah.
self-esteem. So there's a very real logistical side, and then there's the impactful trauma response side of it as well. So it's kind of twofold, and they're
Mhm.
one I can't do anything about. My parents were my parents. I can't. That's the lack of parenthood is gone. Once I got of age, whatever we determine that is, that's irrelevant. That kind of it just kind of faded over time. Not that I don't remember it. So from that aspect, yes. But it was am I worthy of someone looking at me and being like, that Jay is enough in this world? That's the hard one, because being antisocial, I'm not connecting with people enough to know whether they are or not. And look, none of us really control what the other person, whether it's our coworkers, we want them and we like for them to accept us, no matter what we do, good or bad. They're going to determine that on their own. So,
Yeah. It's so interesting for me. The lack of trust was internalized. It was, I don't trust myself. That feeling of like self-worth I had, I didn't disclose to anyone I was assaulted I was raped. I don't know why we've started saying assault now. It like, I guess feels more gentle. I was raped when I was 15. I was raped in my late 30s. And when I was younger, I didn't disclose to anyone. It wasn't a thing. I knew it had happened. The person and the boyfriend that had done it knew it had happened. Like it was not a secret between the two of us that had happened and that it was really wrong. But for me, I had turned this in on myself so dramatically, where it was like this lack of self-worth. I really took it as like, I don't deserve good things. I don't deserve to be treated well. And I ended up staying in that relationship for 9 months with someone yelling at me, showing up at my home and like banging on the windows, taking my class ring and throwing it against a dumpster. And I like had to go find it. Just like all this stuff, grabbing me, just like awful, isolating me from friends. I had a really nice friend group in middle school, and that was like decimated by the end of 9th grade when I had been in this relationship for a while. And I genuinely, truly didn't think that I deserved any better. And more than that, like my self-esteem had eroded to the point that I didn't think I could function without this person, right? Every day was like living with a sand blaster, like a big like industrial sanding machine, was my self-confidence, my self-worth, all of the things that I liked about myself, I just didn't think existed anymore. I'd been very active in theater. I'm still a pretty theatrical person. And that fell by the wayside. I'd been in the high school musical that I'd wanted to be in since I was in like, and watching my school do these big elaborate productions. And I came out and I was like, how was it? And he went, and I didn't go back to doing drama for years and years. I mean, arguably still haven't gone back in that same setting, but I really fundamentally didn't believe that I deserved anything good. And so because of that, I kept replicating that relationship, right, Jay? You talked about like relationships being this space where you can kind of play out these dynamics of lack of trust and self-worth and all of that. And so I kept dating the same person over and over and over again in like a different meat suit. And that yuck, right? It was so difficult. And it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I was like, whoa, like this is really, really problematic. I keep doing this again and again and again and again and again. And even though at that point I'd really come to terms with a lot of what this experience had cost me, I still was struggling with that lack of self-worth. And this sounds, I don't know if it sounds silly or not, but I'd done all sorts of therapy, and I just done a lot of therapy and women's retreats and all this stuff. It wasn't until I hired a business coach, and she was like, no, bitch, like this, I'm going to try not to cuss. She was like, no, this is what your value is. And like, don't let anyone take it. And I started to express that through entrepreneurship, that all of a sudden that like really clicked for me and solidified. And I don't think it was because of like, now I sell something and I think I'm valuable. It was, now I feel like really, really crystal clear on what I have to offer in the world. And it feels like obvious and easy that I would want to share that with people. And that I think has had, like, being an entrepreneur has helped me heal in that regard, more so I think than any other aspect of stuff that I've tried, 12 steps, therapy, all of it. I think being like, no, I own a business and this is how I express myself has helped that worth like vacuum, right? It had kind of like corroded inside of me, and that's just kind of burst out. over the past several years as I've done the work that I do.
I'll tell you what I heard you saying there, Dr. Liz, was one of the big things I've learned through doing my research for my own process is a lot of folks who are sexually abused, their ability to create boundaries is all out of whack.
Mm-hmm.
And it can manifest itself in one of two ways. Either you think that the events are who you are, so they're often those people who are sexually abused become hypersexual.
Yep.
Or what they do is they do go the opposite way, and they don't want to be intimate in any way, shape, or form. I experienced both 2 different times.
Yep.
When I was younger and first active sexually, I was hypersexual because I was still so close in time to what had happened that identifying as that was fresher. So
mm-hmm.
I leaned more to the hypersexual side as I was younger. As I got older and I more so started to self-isolate, like I talked about earlier, it became a case where, especially the first time I would be intimate with someone, that's when the PTSD would have flashbacks, and I would have sexual anxiety where I didn't want to be intimate in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that word boundaries is a big thing with those of us who have been sexually abused, because we don't know we don't know how and where to set those boundaries, and they can be extremes like it was for me. But that goes to the self-esteem, knowing your worth, because if you know your worth, you can have good, hard, healthy boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
When you feel like you are your events, for me, I was this big. So, socially my boundary was like this, but my intimacy boundary was this giant question mark. It was a squiggly line all over the place. So yeah, the boundary thing is a big one for sexual abuse survivors.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
something interesting, a theme that I've heard both of you guys touch on, and I think even myself, what I'm hearing is having issues with feelings of worthiness. And I'm wondering if that is where that's stemming from, because I know, like, for me at least, I've had feelings of unworthiness, and I know with my situation I had a lot of internalized self-blame. Like, I blamed myself.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so I was like, it was me. Like, it was hard for me I couldn't even see what happened, because it was like, it's my fault instantly. And then I just kind of tried to forget about it, didn't want to think about it. And it wasn't until I was in therapy, and when I was repeating the story back out loud for the first time, and they're like, you were assaulted, you were raped. This is what happened. I'm not sure from start to finish of the whole story. That's what happened. And it took a long time for me to get past that and to actually see things for what they were, and like, okay, and begin to heal. And I also think the boundaries, you're spot on with the boundaries. But I wanted to kind of get you guys' opinion on something, because one thing that I have noticed, a lot of people are always like, well, why do victims, they come out years later, decades later, whatever the case may be, and all of a sudden now you want to talk about it, or now you are bringing it up, and now it's Me Too. And me, I can always understand, because I'm just like, you don't want to even think about it in the moment. And then you kind of get the courage when you hear other people expressing themselves, and they expressing their story and their truth, and don't let it be the same perpetrator. So I just kind of wanted to get you guys' opinion on what you think about that, like with people coming out years later and talking about it, or being open to talking about it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's funny. We a couple weeks ago on the podcast, we were talking with someone who had sexual abuse background, and I dug a little deeper into some of the statistics in this country for how many cases are reported to police. It's only about 30%, and that number drops to about 20% if you know your perpetrator and 20% if it happens on a college campus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a again, it's a subtopic of mental health issues. It's a specific event. And in the mental health realm, people don't talk about whatever they may be going through, whatever their background might be. But I just found it interesting that the better we know our perpetrator, the less likely we're aware. Now, this is for reporting to police, not talking to anyone. But I can imagine that number's still low. I can only say for me, and you spoke, Dr. T, you spoke about a lack of worthiness. Like I said earlier, my lack of worthiness came more from the fact that you're my son, but I'm not able or willing to help you get through this situation. To me, that my foundation was telling me I wasn't worthy.
Mm-hmm.
Indirectly and direct, by actions or lack of actions. So
we're getting that support that you need from. You look at your parental figures as, they're the guide, they're the ones. We don't know, they don't have all the answers, but you kind of expect them to be able to help guide and get you through it.
Right.
And
being a male was probably, for me, was probably part of why it took me so long to finally, say something out loud. And that's that, the numbers for males talking about it is with anything is way down, but especially with sexual abuse. I know ever since I've really kind of expressed my story on the podcast, I've had many, many folks, in public settings and in private messages come forward and say, thank you. I've gone through the same thing. And not one of them was a man. Every single one of them. And it's probably been, a few dozen over the course of a few years that, that have disclosed to me, not one man, all females. And that's sad because, that's part of what I really want to, hoping that men listening or watching the podcast will kind of, like with anything, the less you feel alone, the more likely you are to express in a safe environment that something's happened to you as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I am trying to think. I've been doing research on sexual violence for like 22 years now, I guess. And I've yet to meet a woman that hasn't had an experience. And I have yet to meet a man who's been open about their experience. I've been, like, I guess, a dark honor. I've been honored to have a number of men disclose to me over the years, but women tend to disclose and then really find some aspect of empowerment to it where they can then connect with other people. And I don't see that happen with men. And, we have, who knows how nebulously good the statistics are because of all the different reasons people don't disclose. We know 1 out of 6 men approximately have gone through something like this, right? It's 1 out of 4 women. And yeah, I mean, the numbers aren't that
crazy.
Different. Yeah. And, I find a lot of fault with the numbers just as a researcher that's done this work for a long time. I don't think the number 1 out of 4 women is accurate. Like I said, I've never given a talk. I'd never had a podcast. I've never had an interaction with a woman where this was the topic and they didn't end up discussing with me. And so perhaps that's, a wonky sample, but for better or for worse, I've done this work in the United States, Cambodia, Indonesia, and Russia, and that's been my experience in all 4 countries. But with men, they're quiet, and I'm not a man, so I don't want to be like, I understand, but I think to a large extent, I like to think that I get it right on some level. Like, there's such a high cost to speaking up about this, period. And then if on top of that you have masculinity playing a role in, this undermines your worth as a man, your worth as a provider, your worth as a protector, strong, all these different things that get turned on their head when we think about fundamentally the crime of someone saying, you don't get to decide what happens to your body, I do, right? Because fundamentally that's what this is, right? It's somebody saying, I'm imposing my will on yours physically, the end. And we criminalize that, But because of the way that our criminal process works, it's almost impossible to prove, right? And on the flip side of that, if you are accused, it's almost impossible to disprove, right? It's such a problematic thing, and I don't want to pretend that there aren't significant consequences to someone being falsely accused, because obviously there are. I think that it's just such a complicated issue to try to be honest about. But the thing that I find consistently that just strikes me as kind of profound is that the people that bear the consequences of sexual violence are the victims, right? I've talked to a couple of people that are on the other side of this, right? They're the perpetrators. And the level of guilt and shame, to me, what the toll has been on their life, when I think about what that has looked like and the trajectory of their feelings about all of that, is so like small in comparison to the things that we're talking about, right? This really truly ruins people.
I definitely thought you were going to say they felt terribly.
No, I'm not saying there's the feelings of something, right? This is how I feel, and that's internal. And then there's the external. This is how that looks in my life, right? I was hyper promiscuous and got pregnant, got an STI, got divorced 3 times in the span of 10 years, whatever it is, right? Like we can talk to somebody about their feelings, but the footprints of the event are evident in people's lives, right? And so when we talk just amongst the 3 of us, each of us can say very tangibly, my sexual assault cost me X, Y, and Z experiences, right? Robbed me of X, Y, and Z situations in my life. For me, I know both experiences when I was 15 and in my late 30s, my immediate aftermath of that, I gained 100 pounds in the span of 18 months, right? That's going to have a long-term consequence on my body, right? I ended up in these crazy, like stupid relationships with narcissistic assholes because I just couldn't see myself as someone deserving and capable of having the kind of relationship that thank goodness now I have, right? That I've worked to create. When we think about disclosure, it like there's the act of saying this happened to me, and then there's the evidence that we see in people's lives of like just the sheer wreckage that this can have on somebody's experience in the world.
Yeah, I like to say that how we view and feel about ourselves is manifested in every relationship that we have, whatever kind of relationship that is, familial, social, friends, romantic. How we feel about ourselves is directly deflected onto those. And if we're living through the trauma response of being sexually abused, we can only imagine how we're now, interacting with all these other folks in whatever way because of that stuff.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Jay, I'm curious to know what was the turning point for you, right? You had this conversation with someone that you were exploring, perhaps a romantic relationship getting off the ground. Was that the moment where you were like, I'm ready to do this? Or was there kind of a precursor where you started to feel like this is something that I'm ready to really figure out for myself?
You're asking about the very first time I said the words out loud?
I think just in general, the sense of I'm going to start, like you talked about this realization of, whoa, I have been defining myself based off something that happened to me versus defining myself based off my thoughts and feelings and values and actions.
Yeah.
Like what started to lead to that shift for you?
Well, like I said, at 40, I remember I was celebrating I was playing men's softball. We were, I had a birthday, and and it's funny, one of those things when you kind of, at least for me, when in my antisocial, self-isolating, even in a group of folks like my softball buddies, I didn't disclose that it was my birthday. I kind of, in my own mind, was celebrating, and I'm thinking, I just, that I had fixated so much on having to create my own family to fix the past, that I was like, it was like instead of it being relationships being kind of coming together organically, it was very clinical. It was like a task. It wasn't just natural. So, I was, and it failed. And I'm like, what I'm doing is not working. What's my part? And the only way I can describe it, Dr. Liz, that was looking back at the time. I had no idea that was kind of God's grace saying, okay, it's all on you. From this day on, that stuff, regardless of whether they were good, bad, or different, you can't control that.
Right.
From here on, you can. So in that 5-year window, I had been reading and researching and going to therapy and talk to friends who knew better than I did. And, just kind of bit by bit, baby steps, and again, the day I disclosed for the first time, I hadn't planned it, didn't know that was going to be the topic of conversation at all. It just, those 5 years, inadvertently, I had been preparing for the day when I was going to say it for the first, you know what I mean? But, when you're in it, you're not aware of it. You can look back and say, oh, yeah, it makes so much sense. Now, those 5 years were kind of those first very teeny tiny, they weren't even baby steps. They were smaller than baby steps because it was 40 years of stuff that I was having to unpack. And unpacking it in 5 years is very short. And I was just beginning to unpack it in 5 years. So, I could look back and say the decision to self-reflect and find my own place in my own unhappiness, and 5 years later saying the words, it was a little bit of, tiny little things that got me. It was preparing me without knowing it was preparing me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I keep thinking of like the snow that we are locked in here, right? Like it was 23 degrees, 25 degrees, 26 degrees, and it had to get up and up and up before it could get to a melting point, right? Before we could really thaw out. And so even though we couldn't see that thawing begin to happen at 22, 23, 27, 28 degrees, it was still happening, right? God preparing our hearts to be able to just really let this melt and say, this is not mine to carry on my own anymore.
Yeah.
How did you go about creating boundaries for yourself, creating some good boundaries like in your life? And where did you see you were lacking them, if you were?
Well, I tell you, this is where the self-care comes in for me, because that first moment of self-reflection at 40 was kind of like, and I at that point, I don't even know if I had heard the phrase self-care. That would have been 2008. I mean, how many people used the term self-care 18 years ago? You hear it all the time. You see it and hear it everywhere now.
Yeah.
So it was taking stock of my own life just internally then. And as I've always been a gym rat. That was kind of my one place of where I felt at home and at peace, was going to the gym. So I was already kind of doing it without even realizing it. But as I was talking to folks and reading magazines and articles about, people just taking care. And at first it just began with, okay, I need to take care of my mental health. It was just kind of fixated there because I would already kind of knew the gym part of it. I kind of got the exercise part. I kind of, it was just kind of in me, but it was the having to explore what mental health meant and what that term was at that age. I say that age at 40, but it was the finding the things that brought me peace, and I kind of that's kind of my mantra now. It's the do as much that feeds my peace and avoid as much that doesn't. That was very, very simplistic, but that's where each of our individual self-care items, whatever they are, because they're kind of individual to all of us. They're what feed our pieces. Some of them, I kind of break down self-care into two kind of distinct categories. There are the things that very directly feed, strengthen, and nourish mind, body, and soul. Going to the gym for exercise, going to church for your soul, going to therapy for your mind. They're very direct for those three aspects, mind, body, and soul. And then there's the other category that I call mindset shifters. Going to the movies, reading a book, journaling, cooking, pottery, those things that we just enjoy for 15 minutes, an hour, 2 hours if we're going to a movie, where we're getting our mind away from the things that threaten our peace, and we're at the very least distracting ourselves. And if we're lucky, if we're picking the right things, are feeding our peace. They're strengthening that peace. And if we're doing those things in consistently and with intention, then you're building a stronger sense of general self. So now you're less likely to make those unhealthy decisions based on fear, desperation, and insecurity. Now you're making them based on what feeds my peace.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the advocacy for self-care comes in, because it's literally, self-care is kind of that Swiss Army knife in the toolbox of life tools, because we're all going to manage stuff. The next struggle is right around the corner for any of us. And it's, doing self-care consistently doesn't prevent those things. It's not a cure-all, but it sure makes managing the stuff so much easier. When you've got a strong sense of self, when you've created that foundation of who Jay is, doesn't mean that you don't have bad days and bad times. I still have anxiety attacks from time to time, and I have my, my system and my things, and I use the term, when I go through a struggle in a moment or a day, let me get to neutral. I can't see happy from zero, but I can see neutral. Neutral is an attainable thing right now in this moment. So I do my breathing exercise, and I'll get on my phone and I'll play a puzzle game, or I know Dr. Liz, you talked about tapping. That's kind of that's my version of that. I do those kind of things, box breathing and stuff like that. That gets me to neutral. My symptoms fade. So now I'm like, okay, I regroup at neutral and I say, okay, now I can see happy. Now let's start walking towards happy. So yeah, that was kind of a long-winded way to answer that question. But
no, it was good. You said something about like protecting your peace, and it sounds simple. I'm going to say this because maybe somebody else needs to hear it too. I decided, I guess 6 years ago now, when I was just like, I had a mental break, had to reset, like hard control, delete my life and figure out what are the things that I need to do to take care of myself differently. And the thing that I had to break up with was politics. And I love politics. I worked in politics for a very long time. I ran a political nonprofit. Like, I love it. Told my best friend when I was 8 years old, when I grow up, I'm going to be the first president. That's a girl. Like, the whole thing. I love it. And I can't partake in it anymore because it is the fastest way to steal my peace. And I went down a rabbit hole yesterday. My 11-year-old is very political. He's in the student government. He's interested in all the stuff that's going on. And I jumped in a little bit. And right away, I was miserable, to the point this morning, my husband and we went out to breakfast together. And I said, we got to talk about the fact that we don't agree on this. And how are we going to manage this as a married couple? Oh, and it was just like, calm yourself, killer, right? But the thing that happened there was not that I got upset about politics. The thing that happened there was that I broke my own boundary. Yeah. I had already identified this is something that, like, for better or for worse, I can't play with this. And there are a lot of people in my life, because this was a huge part of my life for so long. There's a lot of people in my life that are like, well, you're standing by and you're being complicit because you're not getting engaged. And I'm like, maybe, but I'm also not in the mental hospital, right? And that's that, like you said, it's simple, right? Sounds simple. To me, it is not simple in this particular regard, because I have so much like surrounding me, not just in terms of there are things that I have a lot of strong opinions about, but there are people in my life who want me to have strong opinions about this, including my child, right? And I said to him last night, I said, I have to be your mom before I can be, a Democrat or a Republican or a, dodo bird. Like, I can't be that person and also be available to parent you. I can't be that person and also be mentally well, because this is such a trigger point for me. And I say this not just because it's a good reminder for me, and it's nice to get to talk this through with other people to understand what it's like to get activated to the point of really being in a dangerous place. But I am certain there are folks who can tune in on this like, oh yeah, I resonate with that. So if that's something that like you're personally struggling with, know that like you're not a bad person if you choose to disengage on this. That doesn't make you immoral. It doesn't mean that you're not caring about other people. It just means you're protecting your peace, and you are not just allowed to do that. It is incumbent upon you to be a grown-ass adult and take care of yourself, because nobody else truly can.
Yep. Social media is my thing. I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I need it for the podcast, for that aspect of things. I found that, hey, I don't post anything personal, and I don't scroll. Whatever comes up on the actual page is all I see. I don't scroll at all. So that's a tough one, because I like to say social media is kind of the antidote to peace. It's anti-peace. But yet, ironically, here we have the monks walking across the country who are all about peace, and they're on social media, killing it on social media. It's just like, yeah, that's a whole different topic, but yeah.
Do you want to chime in on any of this?
Well, I mean, I have also created some boundaries in my life, but it's mainly with access and availability. I can't be everywhere at once. And so I have to be very mindful to tend to myself first. And I know for a lot of people that can come across as selfish, that can come across as you don't care, you don't give a good dang or dag nabbit. But when I get to a place of not being mentally well, there's not too many people that I can rely on to stabilize me, aside from doctors and being heavily sedated. And so I have to avoid getting to that place. And there's some that will take my peace, because I am overly invested and I do care too much, maybe. And I am just too in it. And so I have to remove myself. And sometimes, for me, it's a great feeling, but I feel like, navigating how to deal with others, because, some may view like, well, what are you doing? Like, why can't I, why can't we be like this or whatever? And I have to kind of choose, like, I have to choose a peaceful place for me and stuff that's going to be mentally well, to keep me mentally well. And it's not to ostracize anybody, friends, family, or anything like that. It's just I have to do things that's going to keep me well, sane, and well-rounded. And yeah, so I agree with definitely doing things to protect your peace and setting firm boundaries, and even when people don't like boundaries. And then sometimes if those people don't like boundaries, perhaps you've got to take it a step further and begin to remove certain people, because safe people in your life don't ask you to change your boundaries. Safe people, that I don't know if that's my opinion, or maybe we've got to research. But if they're safe and they're safe to have in your life and they're safe to be around, they're not going to ask you to lift your boundaries. They're not going to ask you to do anything that you do not want to do or that brings you anxiety. Another thing I'm learning, speaking my truth. I think for a long time I kind of just wasn't talking about my truth, and it was at my expense, because I wanted to make other people feel better. I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings by telling like the complete truth, because they would be offended by it or whatever. I'm overly thinking about how what I say is going to affect them. And though I think that's an important thing to do, I do think you should be considerate of others. I don't think that you should do things at your expense. So keeping my truth away from somebody, I can't really do that. And if I'm not able to share my truth with you, then that also is cause for like removal too. I don't know if you're safe to be around if I'm not allowed to speak my truth around you. And I teach my daughter that too, because that we've had a situation in the past where the adults, and I was kind of having to explain to her like, hey, adults won't ask you to lie, and you should never have to lie on behalf of an adult. That's not a safe adult to be around. If you've got to keep a secret for an adult, that's not a safe adult. So safe adult, safe is stuff like that. My daughter, she's 6 years old right now. So I want to be very like, I want to make sure that I'm cultivating, and some things are unavoidable, but I want to make sure I cultivate and at least give them the knowledge and foresight to know what safe touches are, what safe adults are, what safe things are, what's allowed. Hey, what adults shouldn't be doing, or what even kids
Yeah.
sometimes.
Especially when in the social media world, because there's some stuff going on that side of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. My 11-year-old went on a field trip yesterday, and he was one of 3 kids. So they weren't going on like a big school bus with a ton of kids or whatever. And I was at my parents' house, and I'm like looking at this permission slip, and it said the name of the teacher. I've never heard of this teacher. Male teacher, never heard of them. Not that I wouldn't ask the same question with a woman, but I turned to my son and I said, "Do you feel comfortable around this teacher? Is he a pedophile?" I said outright, like, "Is he a pedophile?" Kind of joking. And my stepdad laughed. And I turned to him and I'm like, "No, but seriously, do you feel safe around this teacher? Does he give you a weird vibe?" And like, because I don't really know him that well. I said, "Okay, well, don't be alone with him. You don't know him. I don't know him. And do I think this teacher is going to cause my child any harm? Statistically speaking, no, I don't. Do I have dear friends that were molested by teachers? Yeah, I do. Right. I don't have to go outside of like my immediate social circle of like 5 closest best friends to know that like this is a thing that happens, right? It's not an abstract thing. And so as much as it was like funny to my parents, like it's important to me that I ask that question, that I say to my son, if you like, I don't know this guy. You don't know this guy. Did you get a weird, creepy vibe? I don't want you alone with him. You're one of 3 kids on this this field trip. Don't be alone with this guy. You don't know him. And that,
You got to be straightforward like that.
Yeah, but what like we get when people say that though, like when a parent like me says that, it's like considered funny and like weird and controversial and like that's so rude. It's like, well, is it? 1 out of 6 boys are going to get molested before they're 18. Who's being rude? Me? Okay. I'll be the bitchy mom. That's fine. I'm a bitch, right? But I'm going to make sure that my child has the language and the awareness to say, I'm not going to be in a position where that's going to happen, hopefully, right? I can't protect him from everything, but I can speak to him openly about what the possibilities are and how to protect himself.
Right. And also make it a safe environment for him to feel comfortable to speak to you about it. Because sometimes people hide that. And sometimes they don't have that open line of communication with their parents to disclose that or the support that they need from that parent. So I do think that's pretty good. Just keeping that open line of
it was a little playful, but I think it goes back to, I don't know, a while ago when we were talking about the burden of sexual violence lies on the shoulders of the victim, right? It's not on the shoulders of the perpetrators because it's underreported, it's underprosecuted, it's all these different things. And so as much as it's like crazy or abrasive or bitchy or whatever, to like, what steps do I need to take to keep myself and my child or, whoever, the people that I'm responsible for, how do I talk to them about these different kinds of things? Like we were saying, T, about like safe touches, all of it, like, that gets presented as being ridiculous or over the top or paranoid. I'm okay with that. Like, I'm okay with being ridiculous and over the top and paranoid.
I will say one of the things I struggled with when I first gave birth to my daughter, I struggled extremely bad with coming into motherhood, knowing that I had been through all that stuff. And I now have a daughter and I hadn't worked through all of my trash just yet. So I wasn't sure how to present. And I worried, like I was overly thinking about everything. And it kind of put me into a bad psychosis type of thing because I get so in my head with the past trauma that happened to me. And then I wasn't pushing it on her, but I was just like, what do I do if this happens to my daughter? Like, how do I stop it? And then it drove me to a point of no return. And so now I just try to make sure that if I don't like to push my past and my trauma on her. Like I won't be like, this is going to happen to you. But I definitely, everything that I lacked or I felt like I didn't have, the language, like you said, I want to make it a safe space. Hey, an adult wouldn't do this. Like, and I'll call myself out too. I had my phone in my hand the other day. Oh, this is terrible. I shouldn't admit to this, but I had my phone in the other day. And my daughter was like, "Oh, when I get an adult, I want to be able to like drive and hold my phone or whatever." And I was like, "No, that's the wrong thing to do. Like that is not right. When you see adults doing that, it's not the right thing to do. If you see an adult doing that, you tell them, "Hey, you don't do that because my life is at risk." And I was wrong. Like two left shoes. I absolutely was. But the fact is, like, I will accept that in front of my child. Like I don't want my child to grow up thinking like, "Hey, do as I say, not as I do." I
Hmm.
want them to know right from wrong. And hey, if mommy's wrong, mommy's wrong. Mommy's absolutely wrong. Mommy's wrong, daddy's wrong. Whoever you see doing it is wrong. And you can tell them, as a child. And if they get angry, that's not safe, because right
Right.
is right, wrong is wrong. So
I want to say real quick, we were just talking about kind of the definition of sexual abuse. I know a lot of folks, when they hear the term sexual abuse, their mind automatically goes to rape or a physical action. Sexual abuse doesn't have to be that. It can be
Absolutely.
inappropriate language or words. It can be an inappropriate picture on a cell phone. Um, and I talked about this a couple weeks ago in ours. Please report it. Too few cases are reported, and if you feel uncomfortable reporting to police, if you have a friend that you trust or someone that can go with you as you're reporting, find a partner, even if they're just there to sit with you as you do it. Please report it. Report it to not only to a friend or a therapist or whomever, but it's so important. I think part of the reason why these events still happen is that there are prosecuted so few. So
Yeah.
there's no fear of reprisal. Not to say that that's always a hindrance to the perpetrators, because it's not always. But
Right.
if,
We
if
still have murderers.
yes, if more cases were reported, therefore more cases would be prosecuted. There would be some folks that would second guess the act, maybe. Um, so please report it. And again, it doesn't have to be a physical act. It can be just words. It can be a picture on a cell phone that can be inappropriate. That's considered sexual abuse. So yeah, I just
wow.
want.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Well, let's bring it on home. Our listenership is adults. Jay, for adults, especially men who are coming to terms with this or perhaps have never addressed it, knowing that it's something that happened to them, but they're just not simply up for thinking about, what's your best advice to them?
Well, the important thing is the statistic that you brought up: 1 in 6 men, and it's probably more frequent than that. But we'll just use that for sake of argument. So, A, no, you're not going to be alone just by the national averages for sheer statistics alone. B, and I would say this male or female, but especially men, find a friend, find your preacher, a counselor, a family member, somebody that you trust, that you really trust, and talk to them. There's probably another man in your life, even as a man, that is going through what you've gone through. Probably. Unfortunately, that's just the case.
Mm-hmm.
And probably several people, male and female, that have gone through it. Find someone, tell someone, I'm telling you, that's the beginning of finally finding some peace, is saying the words out loud to someone. So find that. It only has to be one. You just have one person that listens. That's all you need. If you can progress from there and continue to tell other folks, right time, right place, right person is what I say all the time. Finding the right person is the most important part of that. But tell somebody
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
any trauma, let alone sexual abuse, but particularly men with sexual abuse. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you interested, that those statistics are coming from the U.S. Department of Justice. So statistics are wonky. Samples with this kind of stuff are inaccurate. But those are the statistics that we have as of now. Jay, thank you for that. T, any closing thoughts?
Um, I really kind of do want to hone in on men who may be dealing with that as well, to just definitely find someone that you can confide in. And it, even if you don't feel comfortable with expressing your story just yet, coming out, maybe going to therapy or considering it. This isn't medical advice, but just considering getting in community and talking to people, like minded individuals, or finding community in general, because I do think that it's a lot harder on men to come out and say things like that because, masculinity and stuff of that sort. But I don't think that you're any less masculine by speaking your truth. I think that is something that will empower you and definitely help you begin to heal, to get through those traumas and become a better individual for yourself and those around you.
Mm-hmm.
Being silent, it's going to weigh on you. It's going to weigh on your heart. It's going to weigh on your soul. So just hoping that you reach out, you find community, you don't let it get you down and boggle you down. But that's about it. How about you, Dr. Liz? What are some of your closing thoughts?
Well, first is a quasi shameless plug. So if you are a man and you are listening to this and going, this is part of my life, know that this is a significant part of my practice, that I work with men that are going through this, have gone through this, are processing this. So don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach us at psychedpod@gmail.com, or you can reach me just at drliz@drlizdubois.com. So know, not only are there practitioners out there that specialize in this, but if you're listening to this, I'm one of them. So please don't feel alone. Please don't feel like you have to go on ZocDoc and start from scratch finding someone that has these kind of credentials and training. You are not alone, and you don't have to figure it all out on your own. I think the big closing thought that I want to leave on is just that this is not your fault, which is a trite thing to say. But again, victims are the ones that carry the burden of the consequences of this. They're not responsible for sexual violence, but they're the ones that pay the price. So if that is you, just know that you didn't do anything to cause this. This isn't your fault. It's not your responsibility. If it's wrecking your life, know that it doesn't have to. There is healing. There are a ton of recovery resources out there, and you're absolutely not alone. So those are my final thoughts. Does anyone have anything else they want to kick in before we sign off?
I just want to say, since the Eastern Shore Talk podcast is self-care movies, men, women, everybody listening, hit your self-care, be consistent, be intentional. Again, that's going to go a long way towards working on your overall general wellness and your strength of self. So, and that'll help with everything else in your life. So hit that self-care.
Amen. Amen. So Jay Watson, tell the people where they can find you and what you do and how they can work with you if that's something of interest.
So if you need to reach out to me, just in general, if you just want to have a conversation or want to find me, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Eastern Shore Talk @gmail.com. The Eastern Shore Talk podcast comes out every Tuesday evening, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So you can find me and my co-host Kathy Castle there every Tuesday.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, with that, we are adjourned. This is Psyched Pod. You can reach us. You can find us at psychedpod.com. You can reach us at psychedpod@gmail.com. And our LinkedIn links, if you will, our LinkedIn links are also on the website, psychedpod.com. T, do you have any closing thoughts, feelings, concerns?
I just want to thank Jay today for coming on the Psych Pod. You were absolutely amazing. We thank you for your transparency and your honesty, and we loved having you today.
Glad to be here.
So
great conversation, ladies.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you for being here. All right.
Sure.
Toodaloo, everybody.
See ya.